Hello and welcome to the October edition of the Cinetopia Radio Show and Podcast. I'm Amanda Rogers, founder of Cinetopia, and I am here with Jim Ross. Jim, how are you doing?
Not bad, as ever, as well as you can do with a 8-month-old 2 weeks, 3 times a night, but in general, pretty good. Apart from the obvious things around the film scene in Edinburgh, which, we'll get to talking about during the show, but yeah.
Yes, the utter chaos that's going on currently in Edinburgh cultural scene. Clara is also with us again. Clara, how are you doing?
I am good. I'm still trucking, despite the malaise caused by various factors, both political and, I suppose the Filmhouse went down for political reasons, one could argue. So yeah, but good regardless. Good despite it.
Yes, and it is quite a nice sunny day, and the weather has changed over here in Edinburgh. It's gotten cold, so it's like winter is upon us, but nice and sunny as well. So we are going to talk films today. We're also obviously going to unpack as much as possible what's currently going on in Edinburgh in terms of the closure of the CMI and Filmhouse. But after that, we are going to review 2 films, Blonde, which is currently on Netflix, directed by Dominik, and The Triangle of Sadness, directed by Robert Östlund. It, I believe, won the Palme d'Or at Cannes this year. And that's our show. And also as well, we're going to be sort of highlighting different film festivals there's quite a lot of film festivals going on in the city, and quite a lot of them were affected by the loss of the Filmhouse, and we'll be also highlighting their programs and making sure to amplify that so that you can go and support them as well. So that is our show for October. Let's get started. So if you didn't hear the news, a lot of people, I'm sure, have on the 6th of October, I believe, this Filmhouse and basically the organization that ran the Filmhouse, as well as the Edinburgh International Film Festival and the Belmont Filmhouse in Aberdeen, went into administration, and 102 staff members completely lost their jobs at that immediate moment. The Filmhouse shut. And it really caused a real series of moments of crisis for Edinburgh, I think, the Edinburgh cultural scene, but also very certainly the Scottish screen sector. I mean, as we all just last on the last podcast, and we're talking about the new Edinburgh International Film Festival's move to August, and how that had affected Edinburgh. It's obviously 75 years old. The film festival, the Filmhouse itself is 40 years old. It's really shocking, I think, to everyone. I think everyone in and around Edinburgh, but also around the UK and around the world is mourning this in some capacity, if they had positive experiences with those organizations. What do you guys feel, and how are you feeling right now about the whole situation?
Pretty grim and depressed, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I think the thing that struck me in the immediate aftermath of it, first of all, I'm surprised that it happened that quickly, right? I mean, I think with the way cinemas in particular, we'll come to the film festival and CMI, Centre for the Moving Image, in a little bit, but if we just take the Filmhouse and probably the Belmont on their own for the minute, I don't think anybody was under the impression that cinemas were in a good state over the past couple of years. It's been a very challenging time for cinemas. You've got even multiplexes like Cineworld filing for bankruptcy. I think it's very tough out there. I think what was surprising about the whole thing is how it went from existing to not existing, effectively. I mean, it really just happened to externalize anyway overnight. I mean, when I read the news, cinema listings were still up. I mean, I'd been looking at listings for some of the London Film Festival partner screenings the day before, and I'd been planning to go to stuff this coming weekend. So it was a bit shocking in that regard. Beyond that, I think the thing that really struck me about it was really kind of the passivity it was greeted with at first. Not from necessarily folk in the Edinburgh cultural scene. Quite the opposite. I mean, everybody was kind of like very shocked and tried to rally around about kind of like, what can we do? And I'm sure we'll talk about that shortly. But I mean, outside that, Angus Robertson, who has the culture brief for the Scottish government, it was a very sort of like standard response that he put out on Twitter. He even tweeted yesterday, if you can believe this. He was visiting something to do with the Icelandic cinema sector. He said Scotland and Iceland both have a booming screen sector. And I was like, are you serious? Are you serious? Like, I mean, like, get a grip. I mean, and I appreciate that he wants to be positive, and he's probably talking about, production of films as much as anything else. But like, come on, it's completely tone deaf. Let's, pull your finger out of your arse, Angus. But so that, and then Ben Roberts, the head of the BFI, sort of like expressed sadness and I hope some form of cultural. So it's just like, it didn't feel like it seemed to be just. It accepted it had happened, right? And I think, and there wasn't really a lot of, I didn't really feel like outside of Edinburgh and people who kind of like it meant something to and used it, there was a lot of anger about this, or there was really a lot of understanding about what the knock-on effects are. And, Amanda, you're going to go on to talk later about some of the film festivals that are coming up in the city that have been affected by the closure of the Filmhouse. And, I read a thread on social media from the co-founder of Scotland Loves Animation, and I'm sure he's not the only one who's been in this position. He's had to kind of foot the bill for additional venues himself, because of course all the money's tied up in the administration process of the Filmhouse. So when there's all this talk about the viability of this and the viability of that, and whether it's a good use of money, I really don't think there's been a lot of consideration about the knock-on effects of this. It's not necessarily a simple thing, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I think that was kind of what disappointed me about it at first. It was kind of how quickly it happened, because I think there's a lot of folk who would have tried to help rally something around this if it had been a bit more transparent and open about what was going on. And from the UK cinema scene at large, especially given the London Film Festival is going on at the moment, it doesn't look particularly great in my view. Yeah. A lot of passivity about how it's been greeted. It's seen as kind of like some sort of regional, provincial thing, and I think that's pretty insulting to the 100 people who lost their jobs. Frankly, there's a lot of people who we know. We have friends who worked for CMI or worked with them, and there's a lot of talented people fall in that 102 jobs that were lost. So, beyond anything else about the cultural sector in Scotland and Edinburgh, there's also the fact there's a lot of talented people who've lost their jobs. I think it's a bit grim. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I'm feeling a bit depressed about the whole thing.
Yeah, it's a bit of a grim portent about the way that the cultural sector is going to be coping in the next couple of decades even. Who knows how long this is all going to last and go on. I don't want us to go back to the 70s, 80s, where we're kind of, scraping and scrabbling to try and establish a meaty cultural sector in Scotland. It's just taken us back to square one. It is very grim, and the thought that people are going to have to scramble at the grassroots level to try and win things back and try and keep things alive here is just very, very depressing. More work to be put in.
Yeah, I think the situation to me, and it's something that I've read a lot about, or but there's a lot of stuff that nobody knew about, and I think that's the shock. So obviously, like you said, Jim, if there had been a save the Filmhouse campaign while it was still not shut, people would have rallied probably behind it. There was one during COVID. So there was one during, that there was a crowdfunder that, went out, and people rallied behind it as well.
Well, I mean, exactly. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. I donated to that. I remember that crowdfunding effort for the Filmhouse.
Yeah. And there's quite a lot of members, of that organization that now kind of literally like that information is now lost. It's literally, or it's being held within an administration. So there's a lot of stuff kind of locked into this administration. That's absolutely, it's terrible. It's not something that literally the Scotland government or Creative Scotland don't actually have any control over at the moment. So it's, I think there's a lot of people who feel like pessimistic. And I think, we'll note that I had, some participation in the starting of the petition for saving the Filmhouse and the Edinburgh International Film Festival. And I highly recommend that anyone who's listening go on to change.org and sign that petition. What it is really is just a measure of support, saying we don't want to lose a cultural space like this, and we also want to lend our support to the staff members who lost their jobs, which completely unfairly, and also in the way that they didn't actually have any notice. So they were told that there was a meeting, and then that day they, that happened. So it's disgusting how that happened, and I don't think anyone really is happy with the way that the CMI managed the money. And obviously, like, as more and more information goes out, or how they managed this situation with the loss of these jobs, but it's more of an idea of getting a collective support to support the the importance of these institutions, these separate organizations, as what they are, and what they mean to Edinburgh, and what they mean to Scotland, and what they mean to the world. So highly hope that you will share that and sign it. And I don't know what that will lead to, but it has been leading to a first public meeting that happened on Friday. And I think there'll be more meetings, just discuss where this can go. And the good news is that, this, people from the Edinburgh Council were, at the meeting, people from Creative Scotland were at the meeting, and there's a keen interest to see what people want. But there's a lot of things that potentially people can't have, get, like, at the current moment. I think some of it comes down to that building, which is one of those questions, whether or not, and I guess I will pose this both out to you. There's always things that are great and bad about, certain buildings or certain cinemas, or, certain ways things were run or whatnot. And I won't go forward and say any things that I disliked, but, that building was an interesting one. And I think that's kind of one of the ones that the problem is they were going to build a bigger building. This was this discussion that they were going to build this, 7-story, tower, which I didn't particularly like myself. But, is it the loss of the building, or is it the loss of the Filmhouse, like, as an institution? Like, how can you separate those two? And I think that was the question that was being brought up in this public meeting that was really interesting. And, I think you might have to at this stage, but I think there's a lot of people who will get nostalgic for that building too. And there was reason to enjoy it,
I'm probably, maybe I'm slightly different to most in here. I remember when that announcement for the new Filmhouse venue in Festival Square was announced, and also I had a little bit of skepticism about how much it would cost, and the use of the space and all the rest. I think broadly speaking, it was probably a good, he says, tentatively planned, because I don't think you could task a a cultural organization, so with the upkeep of that building, which is a lot. I think it's also probably contributed to the current situation. There's a lot of questions to be asked about CMI leadership and how they spent money, but the fact of the matter is we've seen energy bills going through the roof recently. That will have especially been the case in that building. It will have been very hard and difficult to power and heat, and the price caps didn't apply to businesses. So, I think that will have been a massive problem for them. To me, it is the organization and the programming and cultural development that went with it. That's what I lament the loss of. Now, I quite like the Filmhouse building, but it was always a bit of an, I mean, if we take a step back and remove our nostalgia for it, it was always a bit of an odd duck of a space. I mean, like, it wasn't particularly optimal. It kind of worked. It had character. I liked it. But to me, what we've lost is, and you could split hairs about kind of like what was programmed at the Filmhouse, right? I mean, I think you could do that with just about any cinema that is independent and what they choose to show, right? But I genuinely don't think there was a lot of programming that the Filmhouse put on that was being properly replicated elsewhere in the city,
No.
right?
No,
You know,
absolutely.
like the multiplexes were generally not doing it. You'd get the occasional odd little art house film that would be played on a tiny screen at Cineworld, but generally, you know, Odeon, none to be seen. View, none to be seen. You know, unless ironically it was the film festival, right? But we'll come to that in a minute. The Cameo is, it's a cinema I like, and it still shows kind of, you know, slightly off the beaten track films, but ultimately it is a more commercial outlook. It's part of, you know, Cineworld parent company, and Cineworld is in trouble as well, so Christ knows what's going to happen there. The Dominion is very commercially focused. The Everyman is, you know, it has some interesting screens from time to time, but it's a different type of cinema, right? It's more about your, you know, luxury experience type stuff, which has its place, but you know, you can't you know, you can't sustain a cultural sector in a city on that sort of thing alone. You know, like for instance, like one film that we spoke about on the show, we didn't do a full review, was Il Buco, right? Small Italian film. I went to see that at Baby and Carer screening at the Filmhouse. There's nowhere else in the city that would be happening. It just would not be happening. There are films that I have seen at the Filmhouse where I would not have seen them anywhere else in the city. Like basically, I would have had to travel to Glasgow and Glasgow Film Theatre, and I really hope Glasgow Film Theatre is not in a similar position to CMI, right? But I would have had to travel to Glasgow to do that. You know, so there's that, and then there's a lot of things went on under that roof. You know, youth programmers, critic mentoring workshops. You know, we've already mentioned it would be the venue for lots of smaller film festivals outside of Edinburgh International Film Festival. That's gone, right? And I realize that, you know, they can relocate to other locations, like, you know, many of these festivals they've had to do that, right? But it's competing for more space at those venues, right? It's you always felt that the Filmhouse had this as part of its kind of mission, right? Part of his mission was to put on screenings for the Edinburgh Spanish Film Festival, for Scotland Loves Animation, Edinburgh Short Film Festival, you know, like all of the, you know, the Taiwan Festival that we're going to speak about, like one point they had the Edinburgh Greek Film Festival, they've had Ibero, like all these things. Now they are competing for space elsewhere, and if it needs to go to a different building, I'm fine with that, to be honest. I would still like it to retain a spot in the, like, properly in the center of the city, I think. And I define that pretty broadly. I mean, like, I live in the Leith area. I'd be happy with something in the Leith area. I think probably quite good there. But the point is, I think it needs to be in the center of the city, and to get the most out of it. But it is the organization, kind of its mission and outlook, that I think the city will miss. I don't think it will miss the building. I have to be honest. I like the building. I have a lot of fondness for it, but if you're asking me to either revive the Filmhouse in a new location, or at great extra cost to revive the Filmhouse in the same location and burden it with the same maintenance and costs that it had before, I'm not going to take that deal. I think it's more important that we get the outlook of it as an organization back.
Right. Clara, how do you feel?
I feel guilty, actually. Well, initially I felt a sense of kind of guilt and regret that I hadn't gone along more and kind of had been a bit more of a participant in the scene and bought more tickets. But then obviously I just had to keep reminding myself, like, well, I mean, I'm just one of thousands of people who's been impacted by the cost of living crisis and by inflation and wages. So, like, I try not to beat myself up about it, but I do feel a sense of guilt. And I missed the time when I was just gone told about the architecture and the new plans for it to be rebuilt. I missed that time. You don't really know you have until it's gone, and that is definitely the case of the Filmhouse for me. I've been going there since I was 14, and their DVD rack was a great source of joy to me, just cherry picking whatever seemed appealing to me on the day. And it's just such a shame. And I'm concerned about the Cameo as well now, so I immediately went and brought a membership to the Cameo, even though it doesn't deliver the same kind of things as the Filmhouse. But so the last couple of screenings I've gone to the Cameo that I really loved, they were not well attended, and that really disturbed me. And I'm just trying now to goad my friends into coming along to more screenings. So I went to Ganja and Hess, for example, the other night, one of the I think the Cannes The Cannes board described it as one of the most 10 influential films of the 70s, which is like a really insane kind of accolade when you think about it. And there was about 8 people there, including me and my friend. And it's just worrying. I want to get involved somehow to try and beef up attendance and get things going, but I just don't really know. We need to band together. We need to be communicating more.
I think
get more information.
Something that's worth mentioning. I'd be interested to see what you two think of this, right? So I'm from Dundee, and I was reading an article in the Courier, which is the local paper there, about this, and it was talking about it in the context of Dundee contemporary arts, right? Which is, it's a multi sort of media space, right? It has an art gallery, and it does, it's got it's a much more kind of broad cultural space than just cinema, but it has a 2-screen cinema. And I wrote about it for a site that I freelanced for a few times that were looking for articles about local cinemas, and I really debated about whether to write about the Filmhouse or write about the DCA, and I wrote about the DCA. This article was talking about it in the context of the DCA, and it actually really annoyed me, and I think it speaks to something where I don't think you should feel guilty, Clara, to be honest, because it mentioned something about use it or lose it is a message that Edinburgh cinema goers failed to heed. And I am honestly, I've been banging on about this on social media a lot recently, and I will keep doing it. Whilst I appreciate things need to be financially sustainable, let's say, right? And it needs to be viable. We've heard that word viability a lot, right? I want to know what the definition of this is and under what terms, because I am absolutely begging people to stop with this brutally capitalist, brutally free marketeer approach to cultural development, right? More went on under that roof than simple film screenings, right? The expertise in that building is lost, right? At least temporarily. And there are things that happen there, and there are things that we need to consider about how we bring culture to audiences which have a public good and deserve some public funding. Now, in the case of the CMI, I realize it's not as simple as that, because clearly they've received a lot of public money over the past, year, 2 years, and not made particularly great use of it at a leadership level, clearly. But putting that to one side, I'm really tiring of this. Audiences have voted with their feet. Can we not think a bit bigger than this? Can we not think a bit bigger than this? And I keep returning to that argument that I've seen the film director James Gray make, which is, if you want a healthy cinema sector, if you want people to go to the cinema, you need to be showing things, and you need to be showing things with variety and range, and consider that there are things beyond blockbusters. Because if you only do that, you narrow the audience. And if you narrow the audience, that's when it dies. Right? It's not this idea that, if something doesn't make money, it's basically, cinema's always existed in this weird space where it's like part culture and part business, right? I think more so than other art forms, more so than going to an art gallery, even more so than even kind of music, to be honest with you, because you've even got the separation between live and recorded music there. I think we need to be, as a nation, we need to think bigger than this. We need to think about what this is the loss of. It is not just a loss of a city centre cinema. It is the loss of a cultural institution which brought things to audiences that other places did not. It is the loss of a decades-running film festival which brought international cinema to Scotland. It is the loss of more than just a city centre cinema. And that message needs to get out there. There are too many people who are not plugged into say, and I don't blame them for it. This is my point. I don't think you can blame audience for this. I'm sure there's lots of people you can point the fingers at, but I think as soon as we start saying, oh well, people didn't go, if people want to keep it, they should go, it misunderstands what the point of somewhere like this. If we're talking about, if we're talking about one of the 2 view cinemas in the city, I might have a different opinion. I don't have this feeling about Cineworld, for instance, right? we're talking about something
it's not
which is
doing well either.
Or else would the city get slushies the size of my abdomen?
But the idea of Cineworld going, the idea of the Cineworld disappearing I mean, I'd be annoyed. I mean, sure, like it's less choice in the city, but I wouldn't feel it was like a wound to Scotland's cultural sector in the same way. And I think that's the message that needs to get out there. This is not a loss of a 3-screen cinema in the centre of Edinburgh. It is more than that. It is so much more than that.
Yeah, I will second that, and the fact that, like, as someone who runs film events, which honestly I did run, I ran a series at the Film Guild, which I will like to add another, that's another group that has lost, there's a major loss for them. So we're talking the longest continually running film society in the world was housed within the Filmhouse and this sort of secret cinema they had, but they had this amazing program and they had been running it, you know, like they're solvent, and they did put a tweet out, or like messaging out saying basically like, we're solvent, we just don't have a home now and we don't know, you know, and you know, they started the film festival, so that, you know, so they're at a loss too, as you know, as well, which is really, really sad. And I do agree with you, Jim, on that, but I also I agree that these things cost money. So when you're providing when you're one of the only spaces that is providing audio descriptions and closed captions and this and baby and care, you know, like events and all of this stuff that they're bringing to the community in terms of cinema and the type of programming, as you're saying, like these independent cinemas do not have a space. And I can tell you that right now. You can tell me that, they can go find a place in Dominion or Summer Hall, but like Summer Hall seats 80 people. We've been banging on about this for like since the 5 years that I've been here, is that there's actually not that much space for places like independent cinema, independent exhibitors. And that was the only space. And then they run out of space because, because there wasn't, because it's a small space. Like it literally was a small space. The other thing I would say is that it is a space that I did go to a lot, to be perfectly honest. I spent a lot of money in the cafe. I had lots of meetings in the Filmhouse. That was my de facto kind of, film hub, if you will, that I've dreamed, that existed, because it was just there. And that's where I would see people from the film community. And it was such an important part for this community to kind of rally behind, if not just during the film festival, during a regular Saturday. And that space is lost too. And it's it's really hard to find spaces where you feel comfortable, like just sitting. It's and being in, and it's so that is essence of a public space is something that really, even if it is a business or a charity, it has to be preserved, and it has to be subsidized. And there's that cost per head of the 5 people who maybe show up on a Monday. It's not the people's fault that they don't want to come on a Monday afternoon. Like that's or they don't have the money to spend £5 on a pint of or whatever. We need to have those spaces available, and we need to subsidize them, and we need to put cultural funding and money into it. Whether or not they use that money, I mean, I know they were the most, and I think the paper was quite controversial in writing the way that they did, because it's that I do think that the Creative Scotland would have helped them if it had been a solvent organization. And the problem is all that stuff there was no formal request for like saving at the end. But it's certainly something that people should and subsidize. And I think that's something that hopefully everyone's rallying behind for going forward.
Another thing about it, I just to take it back to basics a little bit, is it's probably the only cinema I can, in my opinion anyway, it's the only cinema in the city where like the primary objective was film, really. I mean, the newest cinema in the city is the Everyman, and it's a nice cinema. I like it. I've been to it a few times now. But there's 3 screens I've been to that have had subtitles in some form, right? Either because it was audio description, or it was captions for place names, or it just had it wasn't a foreign language film, it just had some dialogue in a foreign language. On every single one of those screenings, those captions were cut off at the bottom of the screen, right? And it was only about 10-15 minutes into the film when somebody would sort it. Now I realize I'm going to sound like such a nitpicky wee arsehole here, but that's not good enough, right? And that's not the sort of thing that happened at the Filmhouse, and you know, I'm not going to sit here and say that they always projected everything perfectly. I'm sure they didn't. I'm sure somebody could come back with a counterexample. But the idea is there was a certain amount of care for what they were screening. There was a certain amount of care for what they were showing people. Other places it doesn't have it. The number of times I've gone to the Everyman or Cineworld or View, and the aspect ratio is wrong, or they're not bothered to mask it, or captions are off the bottom, or you know, it's like got some weird sort of like kerning, you know, what's the term for like how you get a projector the right way, but you know, it looks off or something because it's not been calibrated properly. You know, it's like it or not, a lot of these places, it's not their primary objective. Their primary objective is to make money. Now, you know, I'm not going to go too communist about this. There's nothing wrong with that, but there is a space for. There's a space for, and there's a need for somewhere where they care about what they're showing and how they show it. And I think that's what we've lost here. You know, which is not to say that people in these other places don't care, but you know, the evidence the evidence on the basis of a bunch of screens I've gone to is it's not to the same level. And that's what I keep coming back to. I get really annoyed when it's kind of like, oh, let's want to, oh, well, you know, never mind, let's all move on. It's like, no, let's not all move on. This is ridiculous. And it's a bit terrifying in the sense that if you think about it, you know, proving viability. We're talking about somewhere that's been the center of the city doing this for 40 years. Of course it's viable. The question is, under what conditions is it viable? And the film festival for 75 years, right? If it can happen here, it can happen anywhere else in the UK. Probably that isn't London, right? You know, but like, you know, I'll put my kind of like, you know, my rants on that to one side. But the point is, it can happen anywhere else in this country. If it can happen here, it can happen anywhere else. And I think people need to wake up to what these places provide, because not a lot of places are doing that now. And if you lose them, it becomes very hard to get them back. Very hard.
It just feels like taking yet another step into sort of making Edinburgh really a more culturally homogenous and place to live. And I don't want to say cultural desert, but it does feel like that sometimes. If you've been living in Edinburgh for long enough, it does feel like that. You're just losing so many, like, for example, and this goes across the cultural board, gig spaces, and now cinemas, and then like venues and any kind of grassroots places where people can do things like put it up an exhibition, have a gig, have a meeting, or have a screening. Like, all these things are just being pushed out because they are now being considered not viable financially. They're subject to the market forces, and it's grim.
Yeah, it certainly is. And especially when your brand of your city is actually like a cultural city of the world.
Yeah,
you know, it's really surprising as someone who is an expat who's moved here, and you know, to know how difficult it is actually to run events, because there's no space, because it's too expensive, or they don't make it, you know, accessible to people who actually work and live.
Yeah, come to Edinburgh, the world's festival city. What's that? An independent cinema? No, we don't have that anymore. But you can go see Lyle Crocodile at Ocean Terminal. I mean, you know, like.
But yeah, so if you are as impassioned as we are, I do again would like to note to sign the petition, get involved in however you can, show your support. I do think that there is going to be movement and positive movement. I feel confident in that, and I'm a really optimistic person, I realize, but I do feel like that there can be movement to make to keep things like the Filmhouse alive in some capacity, whether it's on, a different kind of organization or however it's, like what it will be. And if you feel the same, definitely share support or get involved. Please do share it with other people. And also really, so as we mentioned, please support your local cinema, but also please support the organizations like the Edinburgh Short Film Festival, the Taiwan Film Festival, Scotland Loves Anime, French Film Festival, and we'll be talking about those during just giving little heads up about what activities happening over the next month in different venues other than the now lost Filmhouse for now. So yes, do support as much as possible. So the first film festival that we're going to talk about that's happening currently is our friends at the Taiwan Film Festival, Edinburgh, which is returning for its third edition from the 15th to the 20th of October. So you still have some time to get there. And it's bringing the best of Taiwanese film to cinemas across the city. Particularly, you can see the film program at Summer Hall and Everyman Edinburgh. And the final closing is on the 20th, I believe. It's a really great film festival. It's run by some of our friends. This year, there's six features and 5 shorts, and they're all under this theme of unusuals. So there's 3 strands of shorts, and also there's a couple docs. A couple of them I've seen before that are really good. One is called The Catch, and the other one is When the Dawn Comes, which sheds the light of the story of Chi Wei, which is the first person in Taiwan to publicly come out as gay, and who dedicated his life to raising awareness around AIDS. And The Catch, as I mentioned, is a fascinating portrait of the camaraderie and hardship experienced by indigenous nomadic eel-catching fishermen as they set camp along Taiwan's Lingyang River. So this is really great festival. It's really wonderful that we can kind of spotlight Taiwanese film that isn't often shown elsewhere. So if you can, take a look at their website and come along. The first film we're going to review is currently on Netflix. I think it premiered at Venice Film Festival. It's Blonde. People have been talking about it. You might have heard about it. And Claire's going to tell us about this film.
So, Blonde is a fictionalized biopic about the celluloid bombshell described by some of the most famous women in the world, Marilyn Monro. It's based on the controversial but very popular 2000 fictional biography Blonde by George Carl Oates. Directed by Andrew Dominik. It's garnered a lot of criticism, perhaps for obvious reasons. So first off, I'd like to express my distaste at this movie and having watched this movie, because I've now got the Instagram algorithms giving me loads of romanticized images of Marilyn Monroe on my feed, which is just really not what I'm after from that app. So thanks. I think it's just low-hanging fruit to me. Just someone had to make a Marilyn Monroe biopic from that sensationalist, fabricated fantasy pulp that Carol Joyce Oates came up with, which this is a quote. So the book has been described as a thinly veiled but highly fictionalized account of Marilyn Monroe's life. And that's kind of that's very light, I would say. There's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of fabrication about events in Marilyn Monroe's life that did not even happen, and it dwells on the dark side. If you're looking for a tasteful and like nuanced and honest biopic, this will seem like a really sort of tacky and tawdry film, and I think it may also seem tacky and tawdry if you're aware that it isn't trying to be an honest biopic as well, which is predominantly why I thought of it. Where biopics are meant to strive for objective fact, but this film is just sort of openly a slave to the subjective vision and narrative that Marilyn Monroe's life was impossible, doomed, tragic, lived simultaneously in the spotlight and in the shadow of the trauma she endured in her childhood, and then as a young woman being extremely famous. And I know it's meant to be non-literal biopic, and it's meant to be a very dreamlike and surreal film on trauma and insurmountable challenges of being a sexualized celluloid legend, but it just feels like really reductive trauma porn to me, which ironically is another limb on the monster of Marilyn Monroe's grotesque myth.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the film, the only thing I can give the film is that it looks nice in some parts. Like it's obviously they put a lot of money and time and energy into the filming, and it does look, there's nice images. It's incredibly not interesting either, like for me, like, and I would be interested kind of in the story, a biopic about Marilyn Monroe. So I found it like just terrible, like from the very beginning, to be honest. And I really dislike this film. And then you think about something like Spencer, which managed another very public figure which is, was a tragic public figure. They handled that kind of biopic in a much better way. So that's Pablo Larraín, I believe, who did that film. And this is the absolute opposite. And I don't know how it got this far to be.
It's funny, yeah. It's funny you mentioned that it was pretty, because one of my notes is making your scenes chiaroscuro black and white doesn't convince everyone that the film isn't tawdry pile of insulting, sexy, stereotypical nonsense, but nice try.
Yeah. I think so. I'm going to mildly disagree with the pair of you, but not from the perspective that I think this is a good film. I'm not really. I think it does a lot of things well. I don't think it necessarily amounts to a good film, and I'm pleased that you mentioned Spencer, Amanda, right? Because that is a film which, when I was reflecting on Blonde, which fortunately I managed to watch in a cinema actually, but when I was reflecting on it, it was one that came up, and when I was talking to somebody who hadn't seen Blonde, I was talking to them about the film. Mentioned Spencer, and the thing that I find interesting about Spencer, right, and we said this on the show, like my reading of it was that it was only tangentially about Diana, right? I think it was far more about the overbearing nature of British society and the British state and what it demands from people in terms of civility and needing to fit in, and it used Diana and the royal family as kind of a cipher for that. I feel like Blonde kind of wants to do something similar, in that it's kind of about, it goes a long way to think about the toxicity of fame and being used for, entertainment, and what that does to the self and the soul if it doesn't line up with your identity. It's very, they go to great lengths in this film to, in my view, make the protagonist Norma Jean Baker. It's not Marilyn Monro. Like, Marilyn Monro is the screen presence. Marilyn Monro is the iconic sex symbol, right? That's Marilyn Monro, but the film is about Norma Jean Baker, and it does that from the start when we kind of see this extended sequence of her with her abusive mother and driving into these California wildfires, which looks incredible, by the way. I mean, there's a lot in terms of kind of the way the film looks. There's a lot to like about it. But unlike Spencer, right, I think this bigger picture it's trying to draw around this individual, I'm not convinced either that it actually has the clarity that film does about what it's actually trying to say. And I think it reaches too far at points, right? So one of the threads that's going through this whole thing is probably kind of like, Norma is not seen, right? She's used, and she's not really, she's got reduced agency in key areas of her life. And there's a couple of sequences where I'm just going to come out and say them, right? Because it's been spoken about in the press quite a bit. There are sequences depicting abortions that she had, or allegedly. I don't know which ones are confirmed and which ones aren't. And the way that those scenes are handled, I don't really see what I can't attach a reasonable reading to how those scenes are handled, right? I see what it's going for, but I don't see what it is trying to illustrate with the way it actually goes around. I mean, it's very hard to talk about this without really getting into it. But I mean, essentially, there are two key aspects of this, right? One is an early abortion that she has. She's shown to be kind of a little bit, regretful and rueful about it, and basically has a conversation, inverted commas, with a fetus in utero, right? And then there's, even after this has progressed, and then it's shot from a genitalia POV, shall we say, one cervix, of them. And it's just, and I'm looking going like, it's certainly shocking. It's certainly, and certainly in particular, I think the second one we're dealing with quite late on in the film is done in a very horrific manner. And I think in that sense, it made sense to make it horrific, right? And traumatic, but it just dials certain things up to 11, and I'm not sure what it's looking to achieve by doing that. Further than that, this reading of the film about it being about toxicity of fame, people being used and not having agency, and using this woman to their own ends, I mean, you can make the accusation the film ends up doing it itself.
Yes, it's
right?
ironic,
And that's something that I have known folk to level at Spencer, and I take that. But my reading of that film, I think it handles it in a much better way without losing sight of the fact that it is using a real person to depict this. I'm not sure Blonde pulls that off. So technically, on a technical level, there's a lot to like about the film. I think it's edited very well. I think the music from Nick Cave is superb. I think it sets tone like really quite superbly. The film looks incredible. I think Ana de Armas's performance as Marilyn Monroe is also very good. But the way this is all brought together and what the film is trying to say, it feels a little bit, it feels very scattershot. And when it does actually kind of like lock on to what I think it was trying to do, it just goes much too hard. I think it's overbearing in how it attempts to do it, and I think it ends up diluting any message it might have had as a result. So I'm slightly different to the pair of you in that I think there are things this film does well, but I don't think it harmonizes enough of them and bring them together well enough to actually make it a coherent story with a coherent message. And I think, unfortunately, I don't know if I'd go that far myself, but Clara's point about it ending up being tawdry, I mean, I'd probably say gratuitous, but we're splitting hairs.
I was gonna say gratuitous later on. Yeah.
But the point is, I think that's the end result, and I think given some of the talent behind it, like Andrew Dominik, I really like as a filmmaker, like Assassination of Jesse James and Killing Them Softly, both films that I really like. And De Armas, as I say, I think it's great. Music's great. There's a lot to like about it, but it doesn't come together in a way that really makes it achieve much, in my view.
I mean, as the film wore on, I was trying to sort of empathize with what he was going for, and it does seem like he's trying to take the Arthur Miller angle on Marilyn Monroe and Norma Jean's fame, and the spectacle of celebrity and the corrosive nature of celebrity culture and the consumers and the celebrities themselves. So he is trying to take that angle, but it doesn't achieve it. So Miller, for context, famously said he didn't attend Marilyn's funeral because he said it was a disgusting spectacle, and he released a statement saying she was destroyed by many things, and some of those things are you, and some of those things are destroying you now. Now as you stand there weeping and gawking, glad that it's not you going into the earth, glad that it's this lovely girl who you last killed. So he is, I mean, so I think that's the perspective that the director is going for. He's trying to make it so disgusting and so distasteful and so tawdry as to highlight that if it was any softer, any more gentle, any more sort of like, if it was a cloying film about how brilliant Marilyn was and how, then it might risk falling into that category of just sort of still idolizing her. I think maybe that's my only kind of like, I'm trying to understand and justify how gratuitous it really was. But yeah, just like scaring the audience and thinking like this is not glamorous, this is not something to idealize, this is not beautiful. But yeah, I have so much more to say about this, so buckle up. But just from the very beginning, it's just this morbid, tragic trauma porn. It's just like, even from the beginning, it's just this ghoulish dirge singing at the beginning from the moment that the titles begin, and it just traces the same well-hewn trajectory, but with just a touch more surrealism, just to try and make it sort of new and cool, which I disliked. But earlier you were saying why they're gratuitous abortion scenes and why I will now go to my section of my notes entitled "Let's Talk About Daddy Issues."
That's a pretty strong thread run through.
Oh god, he beats you around the head with the daddy issues and the pseudo-Freudian take on her life. I mean, it's not to say that this doesn't come from a pool of fact. I mean, Marilyn Monroe was, people close to her, her therapists, people who worked with her said that she did have a little bit of an obsession, especially later in her life as things didn't go to plan, and she had more trauma heaped on her and through her abortions and her failed marriages, that she was obsessed with her father as a figure, even to the point of, casting him as a kind of, is sort of having a Oedipal complex with her father as well. But this is, once again, this is all just inviting us into this woman's life to speculate about her mental health, but for what gain? Just to contribute again and again to these things. But just honestly, the daddy references just make you it's just so tiring, because once you watch the whole almost like 3 hours of it, it's just So the film, I mean, begins with there's a song in the background. The lyrics are, "Every baby needs a daddy to keep her worry free. Where is one for me? If he's not got a half will do. Could my daddy be you?" As she's crying as a child. And then suddenly the sequence changes. She's going to an orphanage. Sequence changes. She's a young woman, and she's trying to get her into her modeling career. All while this song is playing in the background, and which, if you're a woman and you're watching this and didn't already know it, just screams male director, because it's just like the belief of every kind of shithead misogynist, closet or proud alike, that the cause of women's harlotry or mental illness can be directly attributed to a daddy issue, which isn't even, just loosely just a daddy issue.
It's
So
also worth pointing out,
also,
like
you,
the point you're making here, like you've mentioned kind of like stuff that's in the background. This is not a background thing. I mean, it's front and center. I mean, like there are huge sequences where both husbands are repeatedly called daddy. And there's a thread going through it about with letters, supposedly anyway, letters from her father who she's never met. And it's another one of these things where I'm talking about, like, it dials up to 11 and goes for it. Like, I'm perfectly willing to believe that, as you said, based upon kind of accounts of people who knew her, I'm perfectly willing to believe that this had an effect on Marilyn Monro / Norma Jean Baker. I'm perfectly willing to believe that. Am I willing to watch 2.5 hours of me being beat over the head with it, with her calling her lovers daddy, and musical backgrounds, and obsessing over letters from an absent father? I mean, like, pick one of these things. Pick one of them and then still tone it down a bit, and I think you could make the same psychological point. But it just gets dialed up so much that it's at the point where it's caricature, and as I say, it doesn't help the film with what its message supposedly is. And I think when you mix that in with kind of the impact of celebrity on the soul or something, it's like I say, it just ends up too scattershot. It doesn't know what it wants to say, but the things that it wants to say them really loudly and really angrily and aggressively. And it needs a bit more. I don't even want to say sensitivity, right? Because I think the brutality of it is actually one of its strengths, but it's just the way it applies that brutality and what it chooses to depict with it. I don't think it furthers the message of the film. I don't think it gives it a reading which is goes beyond "isn't this dreadful?" And all the stuff that you've just said kind of speaks to that in my mind.
It just really just paints her as a really, as you said, just like a caricature of some like doddering, embarrassing innocent who's unable to conceal her sensitivity and her naivety, which by many accounts, all accounts, is not who she actually was as a complete human character. And I know that's not what they're going for, but it's just, so the contrived elements of her life and the fabricated elements of her life just sort of leave you, just your imagination just sort of reels off and peels off, and you're just wondering, like, is this really, or are we making this up? Is this real? Is this true? Maybe that appeals to some people, but doesn't really appeal to me. I mean, there's this line that says where Marilyn says, "Oh, the things they make up about you, it's awful," which maybe is meant to be some meta comment on myth in Hollywood and fame, but it just seemed really cheeky given that he was just making up
well, this is the thing. I mean, with the thing it's based upon, it was based upon is essentially,
fiction.
As far as I'm aware, like it's fiction. I mean, and like, I think what's interesting about it is I don't think the one thing that you said in the intro, right, which I will question, is I don't think biopics should strive for objective truth, right? I think that's why I like Spencer as much as I did, right? Because it didn't, right, and it tries to say something else with this figure, whilst also like painting something of a portrait of an individual. So I think the approach that Blonde is taking, if I take the Joyce Carol like novel out of it for a moment, this idea of taking a kind of like speculative fictional situation and story and trying to say something both bigger and more specific about the person with it, I think that's a good approach to take, right? I don't particularly want to watch like a dramatization of something who's like, because that's how you end up with shit like The Iron Lady, right? But here it's where I don't really know. I don't think it knows what it wants to say. I don't think it has the clarity of technique and target to make it meaningful.
Precisely.
It's certainly effective in that it is grotesque and it will shock you, and it, you know, its horror movie credentials are actually probably pretty good, but it's just more what is it trying to say with this? And I don't think it knows. I don't think it really knows and has clarity around that. And that to me is the problem with it, because then it goes off in these directions, like the extremely gratuitous depictions of abortions and, you know, JFK getting filleted and like whatever the hell else they want to throw at the screen to, you know, make it look shocking. And in a lot of the scenes in particular that I'm talking about here, the point the film was trying to make, it was brutal, it was sad, it was, you know, it was depressing in the way that the film wanted to be, but it tries to go further to make that message more powerful, and it doesn't. I think it dilutes it.
I mean, it's also kind of, yeah, it's also naff in places as well, which I didn't I find myself kind of laughing at points, just being like, are you kidding? Like, I mean, there's one scene that comes to mind where she's expressed her feelings of inadequacy to her intellectual husband, Arthur Miller, and is convinced that she doesn't fit in. And then she goes traipsing across the beach with her little tray of crudité and then trips over in slow-mo, and then it just gets like recalled back, and it's like it's held up as the biggest embarrassment that she suffered at the hands of his intellectual friends. And it's just funny at that point, but like not, yeah, laughable, I should say, not funny. But yeah, I don't need all biopics to adhere to some kind of, to be bland, and I'm all for taking artistic liberties, and
but it needs to be in service of something.
Exactly, but this is not in service of anything other than just, well, it's just an unmitigated slew of scenes which paint her as an utterly damaged and abused woman, stumbling from predator to predator, getting by on nothing but her sex appeal from the off, always doe-eyed and really just frightened of everything she encounters, which is just playing into the stereotype that the whole film is trying to negate, allegedly. Yeah. I mean, so that Marilyn herself is verbalizing, is trying to get away from throughout the whole thing. So I mean, if it was an exercise in irony and hypocrisy, then great success. But like, I just honestly, it was a bit much.
Well, if you didn't feel that we thought this was tawdry, gratuitous, and naff, you know, you're more than welcome to check it out. It's on Netflix, and the film is Blonde, and but you know, we have our opinions, and so yes, on to the next.
I don't think a bit much is going to make the poster quote, to be honest.
I do have a few positive things to say if you'd like me to.
Oh, you do? Oh, okay.
Do you want? Shall I say them?
Oh yeah, say the positive. Yeah.
I will say about Ana de Armas's performance that it was at times uncannily similar to Marilyn Monroe. So yeah, I agree with you there, Jim. But inevitably, other times she's not very convincing. But I did enjoy watching the uncanny valley kind of area that we entered into with that, and the surreal feeling of watching de Armas performance distilled through the still of Marilyn Monroe's myth, molded and stretched over the 60 odd years that we've been consuming it as a celebrity consuming public. I also did think there was a couple of scenes that did really bring home how utterly vile it must have been to be a sex icon trying to maneuver in those industry circles at the times, subject to men's whims. It was, I mean, fair. It was a nightmare. And I did think that particularly that the 7-year itch dress upskirting sequence was quite haunting, and did speak to me about the predatory male gaze and being women in the public eye. So there was good use of CGI techniques there. So there are some redeeming elements, but overall, yeah, scattershot and a bit, yeah.
Okay, we've redeemed it a bit now, so, but no. Check it out if you'd like. It's called Blonde, and it's on Netflix. Okay, so the next film festival we're going to highlight that's going on in Edinburgh at this time is the French Film Festival, which is having its 30th anniversary edition this year, running from the 2nd of November to the 15th of December. It runs across 30 cinemas across the UK, but in Edinburgh, it's going to be at the Dominion, at the French Institute, and at Summer Hall. And I believe the first screening in Edinburgh will be the 11th of November, which will be Maigret, with the director Patrice Leconte present. And from there, just some really amazing French films you would not get otherwise. They're also doing a whole strand on the pioneer female filmmaker, Alice Guy Blanchet, which there was, I believe, a documentary that was done around her as well. And they'll be having a film by Charlotte Gainsbourg, one of my faves, turning the camera on her mother, Jane Birkin, Jane by Charlotte. I'm not sure when that's happening, or if that's, I believe that's also on Curzon, but it's definitely worth checking out their website, discover what's going on with the French Film Festival. It's has incredibly rich legacy. It has tons of films, highly recommend it, and you should check it out. Right, so the next film we're going to review is Triangle of Sadness, and it's coming out on, I think, the 28th of October. Is that correct? And hopefully at a cinema near you. It would have probably been at the Filmhouse, but anyway, Jim, tell us a little bit about this film.
Yeah, so this is the new film and first English language film from Ruben Östlund, which I think I'm pronouncing correctly, a Swedish filmmaker who won the Palme d'Or for this at the most recent Cannes Film Festival, and his previous feature, The Square, did the same thing. I think a lot of people might know him from Force Majeure, which is a film where it got remade by Hollywood recently, actually, but it's when there's a controlled avalanche and the father runs away and abandons his family. So he's known for his kind of like, comical, satirical type approach to issues. And the setup of this is we open with a couple. Well, actually, we start with initially within a sequence with the male model of this couple going through an audition, which kind of sets a little bit of a tone early on, but essentially our window into the story is this male model, Carl, and his partner, Yaya, also a model, but a much more successful, and because she's a woman, much better paid model than Carl. And she has a side gig as an influencer, and they're invited onto this luxury cruise where basically it's them, but apart from that, it's the ultra rich. So there's a Russian fertilizer magnate and a British arms dealer, and various other sort of like ridiculous caricatures on there. And basically, I'm going to try not to give too much away because there's a couple of like major pivots in the storyline here as we go through. But basically, it uses this setup to kind of satirize the relationship between the rich between themselves, the rich and the sort of pretend rich, like Yaya as a sort of social media influencers kind of purporting herself to be, and the sort of white collar crew, like the front of house, who are, very rah 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 and do anything the guests say, and they're very chipper and well turned out. And then the crew below decks, who are doing the cleaning and the maintenance of the ship, and are generally, and there's very obvious racial dynamics between these different strategies. The crew in the under decks is mostly Filipino, for instance. So there's a lot of layers going on here, and basically this is then a setup for him to poke fun at various hypocrisies, grotesque elements, and I'm interested to see what the pair of you think about it, because it goes a lot of places, right? As I was saying, but we'll try to kind of like talk around it a little bit, but there's a couple of major switches in the narrative, and one which is kind of based around the crew's not going according to plan, shall we say, and the fact that the captain is played by Woody Harrelson is basically a drunk socialist, and he gets into debates with the drunk Russian capitalists and various things like that. And then there's another one later on where kind of the hierarchy of the situation gets upended a little bit. So it's kind of looking at all of these different dynamics and relationships, and it does that quite early on as well. In that it has this argument about paying the bill in the first scene between this couple. So it kind of wants to get into power dynamic in that initial segment, power dynamics, gender dynamics, expectations, and then it probably tries to do that later on, but from more of a class societal perspective. How successfully it does that, I don't know. We can get into that, but what did you two think of it?
I liked it. I really liked the square. So I was looking forward to this film, and this was, I can't remember how long the square was, but I mean, I found the square really fun because sort of poking fun at the art world and it's and in this like very absurdist way, but like also like the filmmaking and whatnot was really, really good. And I felt like this kind of felt along the same lines, but just different worlds. And some moments were just like absolutely like off the charts, like kind of grotesque and hilarious, and just like in a way that's actually quite beautiful to like. It was really well shot, like this very, very grotesque moment of panic where everyone had to or physical things happen to people. It was a really long film, and it had these different kind of segments and parts. And I think I read that somewhere that by the time you're at the end of the film, you feel like you're in a complete, like you almost feel like you're in a separate sort of story, but it's the same people. And so I think it worked really well, in that way. And I enjoyed it, and I would watch it again to get more out of it probably as well.
I too enjoyed The Square from the perspective of someone who's worked in art galleries. That was a very cathartic experience watching that film for me. And same with Force Majeure. I loved it. Seen some of his earlier things as well. The titles of which I will not mention as they are not remotely PC. So a bad move, Östlund, on that one. But anyway, I thought this was really cathartic, a cathartic film given where I'm at financially, thanks to the government. So but it's really acerbic and quite absurd, and it's really overt. It's really on the nose, just a satire about class, wealth, labor, and the mega rich getting their comeuppance, which is a bit fun, isn't it? I know it's quite a love-hate film. I've read around a lot of reviews of people loving it and hating it. So I know that Peter Bradshaw hates Force Majeure and The Square and this, and he called this this film a heavy-handed Euro satire, which I don't know what he's going for there, but I think that's a bit bullshit because it's really not a limited appeal film in terms of style, tone, or anything like that. And I don't really see how that works. But he also said it uses a howitzer to shoot drugged fish in a barrel.
I think
so. That's the poor defenseless mega rich of the globe are just
I see his point in terms of like the targets, right? They're not difficult targets, but I think that. So one of the things that tends to annoy me about films, I've said this on the show before, I've said it about specific films when they try to do it, is I get very annoyed when films present themselves to be much cleverer than they actually are, right? And I think a lot of reactions to this film are having that, right? They think it's trying to be clever, and they're seeing it as very easy targets that you're firing a howitzer at. And I take that point, but I think it's making the fatal flaw that one might of a kind of like film in multiple languages directed by a 2-time Palme d'Or winner that premiered at Cannes, where like they're expecting it to want to be clever. I don't think this film is I don't think this film is trying to make a sort of intricate, nuanced point, right? And like I think when you reach the third scene of a rich person sliding around in their underwear on a bathroom floor covered in shit and piss and puke,
loved it.
Maybe you should have picked up on that, right? It's not a film that's going for subtle, nuanced points. Now, does that make it a good film? No, not necessarily. Does it make it a fun film? Yes, I think so. And I think the cast roll with this really pretty well. I think it's quite fun. I mean, basically, it's almost kind of like a farcical, Parasite on the High Seas meets, at some point, like some sort of like, modern class-based Lord of the Flies type thing. It's a fun film, and I did find it interesting. Do I think many film studies undergraduate theses are going to be written about the class politics in this. No, I don't. But I don't think the film was. I don't think the film is looking to do that. And I think there's something quite funny about this. To take one scene from the film, this fruitless conversation happening between, as the Russian character notes, an American communist, as he puts it, although there's discussion about precisely what Woody Harrelson's character is politically, an American communist versus a Russian capitalist, and they're having this completely pointless, essentially, debate where they're Googling different ironic quotes from their political idols, while this boat rocks back and forth, and there's bodily fluid sloshing around it, and people are throwing it's like, is it subtle? Is it clever? No, not particularly. It is funny. It is funny, and I think it makes enough of a point that you can get on board with it and have a chuckle at it. It's one of those films where, and I don't like doing this with films, but I think a lot of people need to be told it's not that deep. Okay, it's really not that deep. And I think I hadn't read Peter Bradshaw's review, but the quotes that you read out there, Clara, that would be my reaction to it. I mean, but my reaction would be, why are you expecting this to be a delicate, intricate satire? I really don't think that's what the film is going for. If it was going for that, then it's failed spectacularly. But I genuinely don't think it is. I think there's too many absurd, farcical setups and payoffs for that to be what the film was going for. And that's not to say it doesn't have its little intricacies around kind of like how it flips some of the relationships on its head later in the film. But again, it's all done in service to it being amusing, right? And I don't mean that in a kind of sort of like a belly laugh type way. It's more of a it's more sardonic than anything else, right? Is the tone I think it's going for, and I think it does it very well. On top of that, there's a lot of visual stuff which I really like, right? There's a dinner which takes place during a storm, and the way that everybody's kind of like walking at an angle to keep themselves upright, and and the weird, it's almost like they're doing the whole Dutch angle thing, but they're doing it with the people rather than the actual frame of it. It is very well done. I liked it. I don't think it's a subtle film, but I don't think it's wanting to be a subtle film. And I think criticizing a film which is as farcical and brutal as this in its attempts to paint the uber rich as just vacuous, hypocritical idiots should be criticized for not being subtle. Why should it be subtle? And that's not what it's going for. So I got a lot out of this. I take some of those complaints and I see where they're coming from. I don't think it's the primary correct reading of the film, if I'm being honest.
I mean, Bradshaw also said he didn't find it funny at all. So I mean, he's on a different page completely watching this film. But I mean, I thought it was pretty messed up and darkly hilarious. But I was 2 glasses of wine deep and I was losing it a bit. So I don't know. But I did find it very funny. I would say I would describe it as like because it is all over the place in a good way. I think I would describe it as the Poseidon Adventure meets Kafka's America and a Monty Python sketch.
Amazing. That's good.
Or like
but that's a good point. Like there's a lot of around the dinner scene. Around the dinner scene, there is you could actually point to a lot of like Monty Python-esque stuff in that, and I don't think like Python, for all of its influence, like it was never a subtle endeavor. Like when they would do things, like it was clever, but it wasn't subtle and nuanced, right? And and I'm not trying to claim that this film is as good as kind of like stuff that the Flying Circus or any of their films did around kind of like satirizing that sort of thing. But the point is, I think there's a lot of misaligned expectations for the approach this film is actually trying to take, and I think a lot of people are criticizing it. I mean, certainly based upon the Bradshaw quotes and some other stuff I've seen floating around social media, I personally think people are criticizing the film for things it's not trying to do.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I mean, they are taking it too seriously. The Monty Python element is something that people can be doing to pick up on, especially in the banquet scene. I mean, it's just, if you haven't gotten it by then. Yeah. Also, I'd say it's kind of like it's a cautionary tale as well. It's like Brothers Grimm, or like an Aesop fable made about like a cautionary tale about being filthy rich and not really realizing it and still being completely tone deaf. As somebody who's worked as a lowly service wench for incredibly wealthy people, this is like so accurate a representation of the surreal and utterly tone deaf, blissfully unaware and detached way that they see the world, and the people below them, always below them, but there's pretending that they're contemporaries and they can. It's just Yeah, I mean, you'll have people telling you that night is day and you have to smile and apologize for being so utterly stupid as to think otherwise. And it really, like, Östlund is so good at turning those horrible social situations and dynamics into comedy, which I really love. I think the way he handles humor is brilliant personally, but I suppose it comes down to taste. But if you like this, it's the same kind of humor as The Square, essentially. It's just, it's very on the nose. I mean, like with the old gammony British couple representing the arms trade, it is kind of that's our place on the world stage and represented by an old.
But the thing is, like the setup of those characters, and I can say this without giving anything away of it, right? As far as I'm concerned, the payoff of like their setup and kind of like where they go in the film, right? It's worth it. It's funny.
It's so worth it.
Like it's
so funny.
is it smart and subtle? No, it's not. But I don't care. Like it sets out to do what it wants, which is to set up these ridiculous caricatures and give them some sort of comeuppance, which is ironic and farcical, and it does that, and it does it combining with the way in which it's kind of presented and the actual technical choice around how it's shot and the performances of the cast is good. They come together very nicely to achieve that.
I've also seen some people, some detractors saying that they don't like it because it's like a lefty diatribe, but it's not. Yeah, it's not doing a good enough job. It's not interrogating its political stance well enough. But it's just so ridiculous. I mean, it's lambasting everyone really. Like, and you get that through the character of Woody Harrelson, who's the captain, because he says, like, yes. He's announcing over the tannoy. He's extremely drunk. Trying to say that he's a shit socialist, but he's saying I'm a shit show. I mean, I'm a shit I'm a shit socialist, and it's just like no one is spared this whatsoever. Like,
but that's the thing. I don't think that's accurate either. It doesn't interrogate. I mean, and as I said, I don't think it's not trying to be kind of like this, deep, nuanced thesis on class relations and the economics of the world. But I think it does do that. Like, I think the fact that you have these two characters interrogating each other in this unbelievably superficial way about their political beliefs by, as I say, like Googling quotes on their phone. I think the fact that they're doing that whilst everybody around them that supposedly depends on them, in the case of Woody Harrelson, is sliding around in their own bodily fluids in their underwear,
it's
right?
Perfect.
That is a commentary on it. Is it a sort of subtle, quote unquote intelligent one? No, it's not, but that is interrogating it. While this self-professed socialist is emptily, vacuously debating with this guy, everything around him is falling apart, right? Like, that to me seems like quite a profound point.
And they're getting drunk together, and so the Russian capitalists and the socialists are getting drunk together. So it's
exactly.
The intellectual
like, that to me, like,
intellectual
it's
circle
not
jerking.
Subtle.
It's
not subtle.
Exactly.
It's
not
interrogating
exactly.
it. It's just like,
precisely.
It's
Yeah, and then so I don't want to give too much away, but I guess I have seen it. I have seen any blurb that you see, it does mention that there is the characters are placed into a stressful, tense situation of survival, which serves the purpose of creating a microcosm of the outside world, and also like a kind of a sandbox to kind of recreate and reshape their roles in society and their opinions on society and their ideologies. So we have the Russian capitalist who was just minutes earlier debating with Harrelson, googling quotes to back up his Reaganite leanings. He suddenly quotes without mentioning Marx, "To each his ability, to each his need," to try and justify his getting more food. Basically quoting Marx just on the back, just like, so just it does make some really acerbic, scathing comments about how we're all just really self-serving creatures who will employ whatever we need to get what we want at the time and just sort of get by. Which is it, but it's not as grim as I'm making it sound. It is amusing. I enjoyed it very much. And they even go into gender role reversal in terms of labor and sexual exploitation, which is really fun. Like, just chuck that in as well. There's some really great comments made. I think it's great. I'm quite keen to watch it again with some other people and have a good laugh.
Yeah, and I'd like to see it in the cinema too. I think it'll be really fun to watch in a bigger space and take it all in. So I'm gonna go see it again.
Yeah, me too.
support the cameo if that's where it is. And yeah, so we it comes out on the 28th, and that's Triangle of Sadness. So the next film festival that we are encouraging you to go to is the Edinburgh Short Film Festival. And if you have been a longtime listener or a colleague of Cinetopia, then you know that Cinetopia kind of came out of the Edinburgh Short Film Festival. We worked really closely with Paul Bruce on that, on starting this. And they're good friends of our organization. That also means that on the first evening of the Edinburgh Short Film Festival, we're going to be running our normal monthly networking event, and that's on the 28th. So it'll be Friday the 28th at Summer Hall, in our regular spot at Summer Hall at the Royal Dick Bar. But it's also the launch of the film festival. And if you don't know anything about the Edinburgh Short Film Festival, they get a huge amount of films that come in from all over the world. And they have a really great program across from the 28th of October to the 13th of November. And it's full of films from all over the world, including Scottish films, and often very incredible mixture of opportunities. Lots of animation, lots of dramas, definitely lots of comedies. I got a little bit of sneak peek because I did their trailer, so I saw the caliber of films that are playing at the film festival, and they're doing most of them at Summer Hall, and I believe they had to move their venues to the Voodoo Rooms. So those that were supposed to be at that are normally at the Filmhouse have now moved there. But lots of them at the Summer Hall, and hence on the 28th of October. You should join us for networking and the film festival. So please check it out, EdinburghShortFilmFestival.com. So the next film festival we're going to highlight is the ShortCom Film Festival, and that is also a film festival that we've worked with a lot over the years. A good friend of ours runs the film festival, and it's, as you can imagine, it's all short comedy shorts. So this one's happening in Glasgow and Edinburgh and London, but you can catch it in in Edinburgh at Summer Hall on the 7th of November. And at ECA on the 8th of November, there'll be an animation strand. And on the 9th of November at the Everyman Cinema as well. We'll also be at the Banchley Labyrinth on the 10th. So we're talking 7th to the 10th of November. Another incredible film festival that you should check out and support. And more information on their website at shortcom.org. All right, so that wraps up our October show. As mentioned before, if you are keen to get involved, say on the Filmhouse situation, Edinburgh International Film Festival, please sign the petition. Also, please join us for the I Can Where I'm Going, I Know Where I'm Going archive project that Cinetopia is running from the 28th to the 31st at the French Institute. It is a 12-minute installation around folk song and archive films from all around Scotland. It's an incredible collaboration between Diwali and visual artist Yulia Kovanova and Kieran Gosney, who did the editing, and a projectionist Metcha Hunneman, and it produced it. But it's free, and it's going to be really wonderful, and I hope you guys go and come and join that with us. And from that, Jim and Clara, how are you planning to spend your Octobers? or November, I guess. Yeah.
Filmically,
Yes.
film. Well, since it's October, I'm going to try and get myself along to the Cameo and watch some good old-fashioned horror films. They've got quite a lot on. I'm not sure what I'm going to go see yet, but I know they've got Rocky Horror Picture Show, Poltergeist, they got Evil Dead, they got Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and they've also got Bram Stoker's Dracula, which, if you haven't seen it, is really, really terrible and really funny. So highly recommend. With regards to other filmic offerings, I would say I'm quite looking forward to the Banshees of Inisherin. I'm going to try and get along to a screening at the Cameo that has the Martin McDonagh Q&A. I'm also looking forward to a documentary called All That Breathes, which is about two brothers who nurture and heal birds of prey in Delhi. It's really cinematic and it has really great reviews, and I was really taken in by the trailer, so I'm pretty keen to go see that.
So I think on the film front, I have some time in the coming weekend to try and see a few things. So one film that I want to check out is the Banshees of, I don't even know how you're meant to pronounce it, Inisherin, which is Martin McDonagh's new film. Very keen to check that out. Maybe try and get along to some Edinburgh Short Film Festival stuff and some of the film festivals that were mentioned earlier, because I think, with the discussion we had at the top of the show, it's more important than ever to support these things where you can, right? And I think I should be able to do that. But beyond that, I will probably be looking along with my wife to sleep train my 8-month-old baby, so that I might actually be able to sleep for longer than 3 hours at a time sometime this decade. So that will probably be quite an endeavor. So we'll see how that goes, and then I'll take films from there, I think. But yeah, no, and just keep an eye out for stuff that's coming out, because ironically, a lot of the stuff that was shown at Edinburgh Film Festival is probably now going to start coming to cinemas, like whatever ones we have left by the time this airs, or by the time we get to the next show. And London Film Festival's been going on, New York, there's been quite a few big ones about, and there'll be some big releases coming in the coming weeks, which I would like to check out. But so really a combination of that and some of the smaller film festivals we've spoken about.
Yeah, and I'd also like to make a note to everyone if you're in Edinburgh and you want to come to Cinetopia's running and networking alongside the Edinburgh Short Film Festival on the 28th of October. So that's our collaboration between Edinburgh Short Film Festival and Cinetopia for networking night. So save that date, and see you there maybe, and see you next month.